Hey everybody, Josh from Populi here. We're creating forms. Forms are an easy way for you to collect all kinds of information from either users on your instance of Populi or folks who aren't Populi users. You send the form to a person, group of people, whatever it is, they respond and you receive their responses in Populi. But before you can do anything with a form, you have to create one. Let's learn how. To be able to access forms and create a form, you must have the staff role. Beyond that, each form can be further limited to specific roles. As our example here, we're going to design a basic alumni survey form, but you'll be able to apply the principles we're using here to what you need to build. Here's the scope of what our example intends to accomplish. This form would collect basic information about alumni interest in school communications and events, information that a school hypothetically would use to inform a fundraising campaign. We're focusing on creating the fields on the form here, but we have other videos that cover things like managing the settings for the same form and so on. Starting here on Home, you'll go to Forms, and then over on the right, you'll click Manage Forms. This is a list of all your school's forms, at least those that you have permissions to view. We'll jump in and click Add a Form, and then we'll give this one the title Alumni Survey. The design of the actual form, the content that respondents will read, and the fields on which they'll make entries and selection, that all takes place here. We have settings that control various aspects of the form on the right over here. And then above, we have tabs for notifications and responses. But we're focused on actually creating the form itself. These are the various types of elements right here that we can add to build our forms. The distinction that we have is that respondents interact with fields. They enter answers on fields and stuff like that. Elements like headings and text and pages, those are going to explain, instruct, guide respondents through the form. We'll talk about them later after we have a look at fields. Click Add a Field, and under that you'll see a couple of options. We have standard fields, and then we also have linked fields. The difference is important to understand. Those standard fields live only on the forms. That data is born there and stays there, it doesn't move. But linked fields are different. Linked fields are based on already existing fields on profiles. So a field filled out on a form can be moved to a Populi profile. An example, you have a linked phone number field on a form, someone fills in their phone number, that data can move on to their profile. You don't have to manually re-input that data. We'll come back to linked fields in a bit. First, let's look at adding standard fields. So we choose the plain old Add a Field option here. We give the field a name and a description. Both will be visible to the respondent. The description is a good place to give instructions or make clarifications about what the respondent is entering on this field. For this one, we're going to ask how far from the school our alumni live. So we'll call this field Distance from Populi University. And in the description, we'll say, if we held an event on campus, how far would you be traveling? The next option is input type. We have lots of types. We want to consider the kinds of data that we want to end up with here. We're not going to go through every one of the types right now. You can check out the resources in the description for a rundown of all the field types. In this situation, we're going to choose drop down because we can require respondents to select a specific range. The various field types have different parameters. For this one, we define each selection. I'll input those ranges. Okay, you'll notice that we have a few additional fields down here, but we're gonna skip those for right now, except the required field. If you don't want a respondent to be able to submit the entire form without making a selection or entry on a given field, you'll want to make that field required. Any field for which required isn't checked will be optional. We're going to select required on this one. Everything looks good here. We're going to save that field. Nice, we're on our way. We'll speed up and add a couple more fields. I'm going to add a checkbox type field. This type allows respondents to make multiple selections. We're asking for their top 3. We'll input all of those types, and then here at the top, we can choose to limit how many selections they can make on the list. We're going to set that to 3. Again, we'll leave this set to required, and we'll save. With these 2 fields on here, we can have a look at the preview. That button is over on the right. When we click over there, diggy-doo, we're popped into a view that shows what respondents would see. Now, that's looking like a form. Okay, we're just about done adding fields. Obviously, you'd probably add more fields, gather more data, use various field types. But for our example, the last field we'll add is one of those linked fields. Remember, we mentioned at the top that a linked field allows you to move data collected from a respondent on a form to that person's profile. It's a huge time saver. For that data to move to a field, the field has to already exist before you create it on the form. Either Populi built those and they're just part of the software, or they're custom fields that you've built. So again, you should consider ahead of time if this data you're collecting should be associated with profiles, and then build the necessary custom fields if they don't already exist. And then you'll be able to choose them here. We're adding an existing custom field that's a list of possible food allergies. So we click to add a field again, and then we'll choose linked field. And then for linked field there, we'll choose a field and scroll down to the person custom fields and find that food allergies field. So we don't have to design that field. It's already been determined when the custom field was created. But you still have options for how this field works on the form. You can alter the original field name for the form if that's appropriate, and you can add a description for your respondents as well. Remember, we skipped several of these fields earlier down here, but we'll go over them now. Office use only. This field can't be edited by respondents. You would check this if you're including a field for details that your institution uses internally. Once you check that box, you'll have an option to also decide if the field should be hidden. If you leave it unhidden, respondents can see the field, but they can't make any entries or selections there. The primary function of an unhidden office use field is, I suppose, intimidation. Required. Again, any field for which required isn't checked will be optional. Hold for review. This field allows you to require an action from your staff. When a response comes in for a field that requires review, staff can either accept or reject the field. In general, this has more utility for a linked field than a standard field, although it's available for both. Accepting or rejecting fields is often a good practice for linked fields. Here's why. If this box is unchecked, you have this note that indicates that the linked field will be updated when the form response is submitted. So that means whatever someone puts in as a response here will just go right to that field on their profile and update it once they submit this form. And that might be fine in some cases. But if there's no review process, you might end up manually adjusting fields submitted with erroneous data. If you choose to hold responses for review, the entries on those fields don't immediately update the respondent's profile until you take action to do that. And you have two options here. You can update the linked field when the field is accepted, or you can require the field to be accepted and for the form of which that field is a part be set to completed. To explain this, we have to get a little bit into how responses work. So we're looking at an example of a response here that contains this field. As a user who can manage responses on this form, I can set the field from submitted to accepted or rejected. Rejected just means that the respondent would be able to correct the field on their side. If we're updating this field when this response is set to accepted, that happens as soon as I change this field to accepted. If we're updating it after that field is accepted and the form status is set to complete, we have to change this response and then go up here to the status of the entire form and change that to completed. Okay, the last option here makes this field conditional. That means that we could hide this field and make its appearance dependent on an answer to another field. For instance, we could have a field that asks whether or not someone has any food allergies, and then if a respondent answers yes to that question, this question pops up. There's lots more involved in setting up conditional fields, so check out the resources in the description. Briefly here at the end, we'll look at adding elements other than fields. These are mainly about providing instructions and helping respondents find their way through the form. We can add headings to direct attention or to mark out specific sections. As you might expect, this will be a bolded text in a larger size. We're at the bottom of the form here, but we're going to add a heading welcoming the respondents that's meant to be at the top. I'm going to input welcome alumni, and you'll notice that we could make this heading conditional just like other fields. I'm going to leave that unchecked, then we can save. Now that I have that field created, I can click on this up-down arrow icon and drag it up to the top. Adding text is much the same. This text will be the size of the more standard fields. This works well to give overall form instructions. We're going to add a little note of thanks at the end of the form. Once you have longer forms or forms with many different kinds of sections, it may make sense to separate those out into individual pages. This form we've been building is mercifully short, but if we choose to add a page down here, we could then drag the thank you note onto the next page. Also, it's worth noting that respondents must complete any required fields on the current page in order to advance to the next one. Let's have a quick look at the preview one more time here. Now that's a form. We'll pop in some quick answers, and then at the bottom we can see our page progress and progress to the next page. Those are the basics of designing a form, but there's lots more to dig into. Check out the description for resources about form settings and soliciting responses and notifications and managing responses and all that. Also, if you want to explore more training options, you should be aware of our focus sessions. These are 1 hour-long training sessions that take place over Zoom. You and several other Populi users meet up with a Populi support rep, you get a little training, then you get to ask questions. We have a rotating sequence of topics, so if you miss a session on something like admissions or billing, don't worry, it'll be rolling back around. You can get to the focus sessions by going to the knowledge base, clicking on release notes and announcements, and then clicking into focus sessions. We've also popped a link directly to the focus sessions down in the description. I've been Josh for Populi. You've been great. Thanks for watching.